We are in Nahum, chapter 2, and we're going to begin in verse 9. We have a description going on here of the attack of the Babylonians against the Assyrians. This is one of those great movements of one empire to another that is described by Daniel. We could actually probably, as we've gone through these books, been referencing Daniel quite frequently, though we haven't, because he describes in a couple of different chapters, in a couple of ways with allegories, the plunder of the Assyrians by the Babylonians, and then subsequently the Babylonians by the Medes and the Persians, and then the Greeks, and then the Romans as they come along. It's kind of interesting how the Bible just kind of fits itself together so perfectly that Ray and I were discussing this earlier this week, that you couldn't, with the most modern supercomputer today, these Cray computers that they use in the Defense Department, to keep track of all the arsenals and the missiles and whatever one is doing around the world militarily, you couldn't possibly have constructed a book that so perfectly fits together. I think it's Chuck Missler's example, or maybe it's Dave Hunt, I'm not sure, but one of them, a couple of times when I've heard them speak, has said, if you're not sure if the Bible's inspired, then let's do an experiment. Let's write a book of the Bible together. In fact, let's try to write one verse together. Now, to begin with, you have to say something that's profound and true. That's hard enough. About 99% of what comes out of our mouths every day isn't that profound, and some of it's not even true. And once you've done that, you've constructed a sentence, a verse that's profound and has spiritual implication, now you've got to be sure that in all the other words, verses, books of the 66 books of the Bible, there's not one single contradiction. You have to spend years on each verse, carefully vetting it against every other word in the Bible to be sure there's never a contradiction. I don't care how many rabbis you got. I don't care how many scholars you have who know the original languages. You couldn't do it. The Bible is just, it's an amazing witness, isn't it, to our faith, that God is real, that He wrote it, and that we can believe what's in it. So he's describing here the plunder of the city. In verse 9, plunder the silver, plunder the gold. The supply is endless, the wealth from all its treasures. She is pillaged, plundered, stripped. Hearts melt, knees give way. I think the King James really shines here. Kind of like in Daniel 5 when he talks about Belshazzar. And it says, and Belshazzar's knees smote together. I love that phrase. And the King James here says, knees smite one upon the other, or smite together. Bodies tremble. Every face grows pale. Being a military man in those days was kind of like being a salesman on commission. The downside of being a salesman on commission is you don't get paid much of a base. Maybe they'll give you $100 a week or $200 a week and a gas allowance, but the sky's the limit. You get the big sale. If you're successful, then you can get rich. That's why I had to get out of sales. It was really bad for my Christian walk because I was always focusing on the payoff, And some of you are successful, I'm sure, doing that and balancing it. I wasn't very good at it. And just like that, these soldiers, one of the incentives and the rewards for the victorious army was the taking of the spoils of war. So this here is the cry of the Babylonian commanders exhorting their men to take all that they can. And in that, Assyria is being repaid like for like, kind for kind, skin for skin, for the cruelty and the destruction that they have paid out over the last couple of hundred years. And I believe that they know that. I think that as they're being plundered, they're recognizing the methods of the Babylonians were duplicates of the methods of the Assyrians. They had learned well at the hands of their oppressors. The Babylonians took their example and piled heads outside of city gates and skinned people alive and drank blood out of skulls. I mean, they learned from those whom had oppressed them. A lot of what we know about that time, by the way, is available. I mean, you can read this stuff right from the hands of the chroniclers. There are thousands of clay tablets, these cuneiform tablets that have been found, both in the area of Nineveh, what used to be Nineveh, and today around Babylon. In fact, in the British Museum, there are several thousand clay tablets called the Babylonian Chronicles, which take you from the time of the Assyrian conquest under Nebuchadnezzar right down, I think, 500 and some odd years to the time of the Romans defeating the Greeks. So you can actually, if you want to, go to the library, hop online, and a lot of the details of what happened there is available for us today. It's really not speculation. And these records that we have confirm all of the events, the pertinent events set forth in Daniel and the minor prophets, and Ezra, in Nehemiah, including the fact, we talked about last week, 10 of the kings of Israel that reigned up until the time of 586 when they were destroyed by Babylon are confirmed with exact dates and names. We have an account of the vast store of treasure that was taken out of Nineveh. And the plundering of Nineveh, I think, was written for us to look at today. I think there's a message in here for the Christian today, and that's this. Why waste your time on accumulating the things of the world and investing your energy in riches that can be pillaged, when the Lord at any time could send a destroyer, not necessarily the destroyer, but a destroyer, a Babylon, or before them in Assyria, to relieve you of the burden of your goods, because they are a burden. Probably worse than that, though, actually, I guess, is when the Lord doesn't do it. I think that a couple of the most chilling parables that Jesus tells in the New Testament have to do with those men who accumulated wealth and the Lord let go their way as opposed to stopping them. Pastor Ray frequently gives the example of how the Lord witnessed or did not witness the truth to people when this rich young man comes to him, falls at his feet. The guy's pious. Okay, he wanted to know the truth. Falls at the master's feet. What do I have to do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus says, well, you know the commandments. Don't murder, don't cheat, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't lie. You know all that stuff. The guy says, Lord, from my birth I've kept those commandments. And Jesus looked at him and said, one more thing you have to do. Sell everything you have and give it to the poor. What was he doing right there? What he was doing was he was taking a righteous law keeper and putting his finger precisely on the source of that which was competing for the affections of God in his heart, and was saying, do you really love me? It's like talking to Peter. Do you really love me? Do you really love me? Then sell everything you have. Now, maybe he's telling you to do that. Maybe he's not. Maybe he's telling you something different. But the example there's a couple, and one that Ray alludes to frequently is what Jesus didn't do when the guy turned around and left. He had pity on the man, but he was sad because he had great wealth. And he left, and Jesus didn't run after him and tackle him around the knees and say, look, sit down. Maybe you didn't understand what I'm offering you here. Maybe you don't get the cost-benefit ratio. Let's pull out the chart and show you exactly wealth hell, poverty heaven in your case, and let's dialogue for a while about this. No, he let him go his way because the man had made the decision in his heart. The parable also speaks to me very loudly about the dangers of riches. There's another one, Luke chapter 12, beginning in verse 16. He tells him a parable. The ground of a certain man produced a good crop. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? And this is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich toward God. It says in Job 27, though he heaps up silver like dust and clothes like piles of clay, what he lays up, the righteous will wear, and the innocent will divide his silver. Both of those parables, I believe what they're both saying in a different way is that if our focus is on wealth, we're in serious trouble. Whether we're saved or whether we're not, saints or sinners, God's kids, Satan's kids, either way. If you're focusing on worldly wealth, you got a heap of trouble. It says in 1 Timothy chapter 6, people who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, and some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. I find it very interesting that if you go through the Bible and look at every teaching that Jesus gives on wealth, if you read what Paul has to say about sharing and about giving, and describing the dangers of not being content with what we have, not one time does it cite as a reason for that by accumulating or hoarding, we're going to be depriving others of their fair share. Now, if the Bible was written by a man or a woman or by me, I'd include that someplace. Don't you know those poor people in Africa? How can you keep all that stuff for yourself? And the people in China don't have enough to eat. Now, come on. Do your fair share and pony up. Dig deep, brother, and let's just, no. The Lord doesn't reason like we do. Instead, well, by the way, the one time I can think of that somebody in the Bible tries to make that case is Judas, right? He says, that perfume, that's a year's wages for the poor. And what happens to him at that moment? He's rebuked by Jesus. See, that's bad doctrine. It's feel-good doctrine. It's Christian Compassion Worldwide half-hour infomercial doctrine, but it's not good Christian doctrine. God's rationale is always that pursuing or keeping wealth does grave harm to the soul of the saint. Hear again what Jesus said in those parables. The deceitfulness of wealth chokes out fruitfulness. He wants us to be fruitful. And wealth, the deceitfulness of it, prevents that. And Paul, when he wrote to Timothy, some have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs, etc. You know, the fact is, God has lots of money to feed the hungry and clothe the poor and fund his missions worldwide. Now, where does that come from? Well, most of it's given by Christians, quite frankly, and that's a good thing. But see, what God wants to motivate us to adhere to his principles on money and material wealth is a desire to be obedient and to have a close communal relationship with him that isn't being blunted by a competitor for the throne. And that's what being generous is all about. Now, the reason I can speak about this, I think, is not because I'm the most generous person in the room, because I'm not. And the Lord has been working on me over the years, but because I've been one of the most greedy people in the room, and that's why I can talk about it. And I think I can say without false humility and without any inaccuracy, like Paul, in that area I have been among the chief of sinners. Because my goal, when I was 17 years old, I told you this before, I told my mom, said, I'm going to be a millionaire. I don't care how I get there, but I'm going to get there. And if I'm not a millionaire by the time I'm 35, I'll get married. I'll give up and get married. Of course, I was 19 years old when I got married and had 2 kids by the time I was 24, and I'm still broke. So the Lord knew what he was doing. But I was so focused on getting stuff, accumulating, securing my future and the future of my family. That's bad doctrine. Well, I've got to work hard. Because I've got a family. No, the Lord knows the sparrows when they fall to the ground. The lilies of the field are arrayed greater than Solomon. And don't you think he thinks more about you than lilies and sparrows? Who don't even have spirits? I mean, they're just poof and they're gone. How much does he care about us? I love what King David said. I have been old and I have been young, and I have never seen God's people begging bread. He takes care of us. I don't believe, I could be wrong, but I don't believe that God's kingdom will be thwarted if we don't cough up enough finances for him. The reason we're exhorted to give deeply and generously is out of our own poverty even, because it's God's way of ministering to us. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. This subject always reminds me of Revelation chapter 18, where the merchants are off on their ships and Babylon has fallen. The great commercial world system toward the end of the tribulation has fallen, and there's wailing and gnashing of teeth and sackcloth and ashes because they had set their affections and put their confidence in their businesses and their paychecks and the plans they had for futures of prosperity. Matthew Henry said something, as usual, in one sentence that I could take a half an hour to expound upon. Those who place their happiness in the wealth of this world and set their hearts upon it think themselves undone when their silver and their gold and their pleasant furniture are taken from them. Exactly. Oh, that we would get to a place, and I think some of you are, maybe most of you are, where we would be, was it John Wesley or Charles Wesley, Kelly, who had his house burned down? One of the Wesleys was coming home, had 12 kids, and he was a poor pastor, and he's coming home one night, and his house is in flames. Family's out there all safe. Oh, John, your house is burning down. He says, no, the Lord's house is burning down. I guess you'll have to give me another one. What a great place to be, right? It's only stuff. It's only money. It's only stuff. As Gene Nelson, to me anyway, famously said one day, it's only for a lifetime. What are we getting all bent out of shape about our stuff? Now, Nahum's prophecy here is specific to Assyria. This whole book is specific to Assyria. But the predominant message of the prophets we've been studying for the last 18 months, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, and Micah, the predominant message is the judgment and restoration of the people of God. In Hosea chapter 12, it says, Ephraim, which is another name for Israel. Ephraim boasts, I am very rich, I have become wealthy. With all my wealth, they will not find in me any iniquity or sin. Wow. What happens sometimes? We interpret prosperity for God's blessing. And it may very well be, but the Lord makes the rain to fall upon whom? The righteous and the unrighteous, the just and the unjust. So does that mean that the wicked person who's rich is under God's blessing? Of course not. Israel had interpreted their military power and their economic system and their high standard of living as being a blessing from God. But the Lord declares in Amos chapter 3, they do not know how to do right, who hoard plunder and loot in their fortresses. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says, an enemy will overrun the land, he will pull down your strongholds and plunder your fortresses. So there's a spiritual, this is one of those applications spiritually that is laid out in Scripture that's universal in its application. Like I said, believer or not, child of Satan, child of God, saint or sinner, God opposes those with an improper attitude toward material things. And this is what I take out of all this. What seems apparent to me, if you read all the teachings on wealth and money in the Scriptures, is that God opposes the desire to become rich, but not being rich in and of itself. Now, the problem with saying that is, when I heard that when I was a baby Christian, was, oh, you can't be rich, you can't be rich, you can't be rich. And somebody came along and said, no, it says the love of money is the root of all evil. Not money, the love of money. It's okay to be rich, just don't desire to be rich. I went, in the back of my head, okay, it's good to be rich then, right? I'm allowed to be rich, yay! The Bible says I can be rich. And that's what happens. We take the freedom of Christ as a license to sin. Because that's our crummy, garbagey human nature. That flesh will still carrying around, will grasp at the thinnest thread. When there's a tapestry of God's truth and a little thread, I can be rich. We'll hang on to that. For all we got. Maybe not you, at least I did. And that was my area. You got a different area. Mine was riches and wealth. And I am thankful beyond measure that he just took it away. Nothing I did. It's not like, I was praying really hard and he finally, it's just, he knew me. And so every business venture I went into, I lost money. Almost every one. I'll tell you something many of you don't know. I have a business right now I'm trying to get rid of, but it's in debt. So I can't just get rid of it. So I'm trying to work my way out, and the Lord's going to work that out. But the reason he did that, allowed me to do that, made stupid decisions. Don't take me on. If they fire me here, don't hire me as your business manager, okay? I'm not a great businessman. But the reason that he did that was he knew my heart. He knows your heart. And that's why he's depriving you of some of the things you want the most. that you're clamoring after. That person, any single people in here, that guy, that girl, that job, that promotion. Why do I have that supervisor who's such a jerk? Why do I have these employees who don't listen? The stuff sometimes we're clamoring for the most. God is just saying, just rest. Just come to me. You travail and are heavy laden, because my yoke is easy, my burden is light, and I'll give you rest. And at some point in my Christian walk, I don't know when it happened, he just took away from me the desire to be rich. And he's done that to you too, hasn't he? Many of you, I see heads nodding. Yeah, things have happened in your life where you finally, after years and years of pursuing something or wanting something, turned around and went, that wasn't a desire of my heart, it was a desire of my flesh. The Lord gives me the desires of my heart because he puts them there first and makes them my desires and then gives them to me. And I go, Lord, you gave me the desire of my heart. And he goes, I knew you'd like it, He's very tricky, this God of ours, very clever. Thank the Lord he doesn't give us the desires of our flesh. So that's why I say the most chilling parables to me are the ones where he let them have what they wanted, not what they needed. I think that wealth can be a byproduct of whatever the Lord assigns you to in this life, but it had better not be the goal. If wealth is achieved simply by the Lord's blessing, then keeping it is a recipe for disaster. See, and now I'm not going to pound a stake in the ground about this. The Lord's still informing me, and I'm trying to figure this one out. I'm just not sure how I feel. I don't know absolutely what God would say, and maybe it's different for each person about, I hear about J.G. Letourneau, who, gave away 90% and kept 10%, and J.C. Penney. And I'm not saying anything bad about these men. I don't know the men. I've just heard those little, stories now and then. But if what I'm keeping is $100 million, I'm giving away $900 million, I think I'm hoarding, personally. Even though I'm giving away, because I'm not giving out of my poverty, which is what the generous heart does. Keeping wealth, even if it's a blessing from God that isn't pursued, I believe is a recipe for God's discipline. Well, verse 11. Where now is the lion's den? The place where they fed their young, where the lion and lioness went, and the cubs with nothing to fear. The lion killed enough for his cubs and strangled the prey for his mate, filling his lairs with a kill and his dens with a prey. By the way, Ninevites apparently had this affection for lions. God normally will use, like the gods of Egypt, images, the frogs and, the darkness and the bugs, to come against specific gods that are related to that. And here he does the same. I don't know if they were lion gods. I couldn't find anything referring to any deities, lion-like deities, but they did, in unearthing Nineveh, find lots of statues of lions. So maybe they had admiration, and it was like our eagle, we had the symbol of strength and power, and they were very fond of lion statues, apparently. The Lord says, I am against you, declares the Lord Almighty. I will burn up your chariots in smoke, and the sword will devour your young lions. And these young lions he's referring to are the young cubs referred to a couple of verses ago. The lions, the cubs who were in the den without any fear because their powerful father was ravaging the countryside. And it just tells us how awful the destruction is, not only for the military commanders and the political leaders, but for their children. Sin's consequences are very far-reaching. We all discovered that it doesn't just affect me, it affects those immediately around me, and it has reverberations I'm not even aware of sometimes. I will leave you no prey on the earth. The voices of your messengers will no longer be heard. And as I said last week, has anyone met an Assyrian lately? Of course you haven't, because they're not anymore. They vanished. The bloodline just trickled out in history and disappeared in the sand and is gone. There are no Assyrians left on the face of the earth. Well, Nahum 3. These next 3 verses here are very poetic, using this staccato, violent language to convey the image of the destruction of the city and the slaughter of her inhabitants. And I'm going to read through this, trying to do justice to how it's written, though I'm not sure that I can because it's in English. But woe to the city of blood, full of lies, full of plunder, never without victims, the crack of whips, the clatter of wheels, galloping horses and jolting chariots, charging cavalry, flashing swords and glittering spears. Many casualties, piles of dead, bodies without number, people stumbling over the corpses, all because of the wanton lust of a harlot, alluring the mistress of sorceries who enslaved nations by her prostitution and peoples by her witchcraft. And this reference here tells us that the Assyrians were an occultic nation. And in fact, as Pastor Ray has pointed out absolutely accurately, is that the idol worship and occultic sexual practices are the twin evil sisters. Whenever you go into history and look at the nations, whether it's Rome or the Babylonians or the Assyrians, Israel, when she was in sin with idols, every single time you end up in sexual deviancy. It's a sign. It's one of those posts along the road that a nation, a people, a culture should be looking at. And when you look around your nation and you see a flood of sexual immorality and deviancy, then you can say, we're an idol-worshiping nation, and are we not? Are we not? These people were engaged in detestable practices, probably ritualistic temple prostitution. That seemed to be the mode for this time and place in the world. Sorcery and witchcraft, and they had spread these into the cultures of the nations that they captured. It says here, because of the wanton lust of the harlot alluring the mystery of sorceries, who enslaved nations by her prostitution and peoples by her witchcraft. And it's another reason for God's judgment coming against them. It's interesting, I think, that even nations that are not specifically chosen of God, Israel, God's chosen people. I think that the United States, whether it's true now or not, that's a debate we could have all day, I suppose, but has certainly been a light to the world and has sent out missionaries and has been a bastion for Christianity throughout the years, perhaps not in the present. Some ways we still are, in some ways we aren't. But that nations that are not specifically chosen by God are still judged by God by the same criteria that His nation is judged by, though perhaps not to the same high standard. What was Israel judged for? Cruelty, oppression of the poor, bloodthirstiness, idol worship, and sexual idolatry. And the exact same criteria apply to Assyria and to the other nations surrounding Israel we studied about previously, Syria and Moab and the Philistines and Egypt. Whether or not you're a Christian, God still expects obedience to the conscience that He put into every human soul. Now, I've heard it said, I don't know if this is true, I tried to research this a bit and couldn't find any numbers, but I heard someone say at one time that we buy more Ouija boards than Monopoly games in this country. I don't know if that's true or not. I can't verify it, but what I can see with my own eyes is horoscopes in every single newspaper and magazine almost. I pray that no one in this room is so deluded that they think that a horoscope is just a little bit of fun. Well, I know it's not true, but it's just fun. No, horoscopes are specifically prohibited. Foretelling of the future through demonic means, whether it's a plaything that you believe in or you do believe in, doesn't make any difference. I see the psychics on TV, though I have noticed, haven't they gone away a lot of them? A couple of years ago, it's like there were psychics all over the place. I guess that one psychic network went bankrupt, and everybody said, well, if they were a psychic, they should have seen it coming, and and so a lot of them closed down, I guess. As a result, there's a show, or used to be a show called Crossing Over, where this guy does these things. He touches, people's stuff and tells about their dead relatives or something. And the guy that owns the Gould Hotel, Phil Jordan, right in our own little Seneca Falls, is a famous psychic in New York State. People given over to witchcraft is a people who are morally ripe for judgment. It says here, all for the wanton lust. I love that phrase. What it's really saying is that this wouldn't have happened except for this wanton lust exhibited by the Ninevites. Judgment came not because Syria conquered Israel and intimidated Judah and was trying to conquer Judah. That's not why God judged Assyria. What, He didn't judge them because they went in with a sword and killed people and took over? No, God appointed them for that. That was their assignment. Judgment came because Assyria, fed by the success that God had ordained, developed a lust for blood and plunder. The implication here is that this nation even though a pagan country, may have just faded into history uneventfully. Maybe God would have, had a great revival, like at the time of Jonah, and they would have been saved, and Nineveh would be one of those shining examples, perhaps. Or maybe they just would have trickled away into nothing, as they eventually did anyway, but without this huge judgment come from God. If she had just done what had been assigned for her to do. And I think what that's telling us is that in the life of the unbeliever today, the excesses of the flesh, witchcraft, drug abuse, sexual immorality, pornography and deviancy, all go together, murder, hatred, trafficking with spirits, all the carnality that God warns of in the Scriptures can result in a Proverbs 29:1 situation, which is suddenly cut off, and that without remedy. It's a frightening thing to contemplate. But we need to have a healthy fear of God, an understanding of His judgment, though it's not coming on us, for our circle of relations and friends and neighbors, the people we work with and come into contact with, to tell them God will only tolerate so much. How much we don't know, and then there's judgment. There can come a point where God is no longer holding out the offer of salvation. And it goes counter to the culture, doesn't it? It goes counter to the whole idea about God. Well, if there's a loving God, I love when that sentence starts. But if there's a loving God, and it's followed by something like, He would never judge, because people don't judge. Doesn't the Bible say not to judge? There can't really be any hell. I can't believe all that brimstone and fire stuff. But God is holding out an offer of salvation, of redemption, which has a time limit on it. And the problem is that the clock that's ticking for each individual is different. People who say, well, when you're gone, if the rapture really happens and poof, you're out of here, then I'll get serious about this God stuff. Probably not. See, most of the people who are not taken out in the tribulation don't either survive or get saved out of the tribulation. And did I say taken out in the tribulation? Taken out in the rapture. Are not saved or survive through that. There comes a time in which God will harden the heart. We need to be telling the folks that we know that aren't there yet. Boldly, we have to be telling them. Don't be afraid to tell people. Can I tell you what? People want to know the truth. A couple of people that I was talking to this week, I was amazed. I get just like you, a little sweaty on the palms, like, do they really want to hear this? And who am I to them? They don't really know me that well, but hey, just spit it out. Just say it. Do you know where you go tonight if you died, heaven or hell? That's a good way to start. That's a conversation stopper. How about them Mets? Yeah, the weather's been good. Oh, beautiful. How's your lawn? My lawn's great. Do you know if you're going to heaven or hell? Hello? Tell you what, they want to talk about it. They want to talk about it. They need to know, as Ray often says, the bad news or the good news. That there's a God who in Proverbs 29:1, at some point in your life, unbeliever, in your life, may say, you've spurned me enough. You've rejected the wooing, the counsel of the Holy Spirit long enough to the point where you are now given over to the depravity of your mind. So we need to be faithful witnesses for our unsaved friends and relatives. Okay, we'll begin in verse 5 of chapter 3 next week.